There is one resource China has always had enough of: people. The population graph always used to go up, but that stopped in 2022 and is projected to go down in future decades. A smaller and older population will result in fewer workers. This endangers China's status as the world's manufacturer of cheap goods and the economic prosperity that comes with it.
So in terms of solutions, it's not that you can snap your finger and all of a sudden your population will redress itself. There was a reason why the Chinese government was trying to manage this population in the first place.
For 35 years, families were only allowed one child, until China switched to a two-child policy in 2016 and a three-child policy in 2021. But academics say people are still used to the one-child model, and despite the policy ending, its structures are still embedded in many families.
Because you've been living in a family with one child for so long, what you have is you have an inverted triangle, right? So you have this one child who basically, when they grow up and as their grandparents and their parents age, they have to look after two parents and four grandparents.
China has offered tax incentives and financial support for couples deciding to have more than one child. But researchers don't think policy changes like this will halt the decline of population. They say China appears doomed to struggle with the same demographic challenge facing many countries in the global north.
Europe have some countries, they first experience population aging and first experience very low fertility. We never see any country have successfully can use a policy to manage to bring the fertility back to 2.1, which is a replacement rate. It means the population will not decline and also not increase.
As well as with a falling birth rate, analysts say China also has to deal with an aging population and high costs for education, housing, and social care. And it's employing solutions we've seen before. For example, raising the retirement age for women and men by 2055. This means fewer pension payments have to be made, and at the same time, workers contribute to the country's economy for longer. But even so, with an aging population, the costs of caring for the elderly have to be shouldered by a smaller number of workers, endangering the country's prosperity.
Yeah, the way out, I think the most important way is to invest on the human capital and to accelerate the technology improvement. I think this is a fundamental way to doing this.
Beijing has its sights set on a technological revolution. As automation replaces manufacturing jobs, researchers say China is aiming to pivot to selling high-tech products for high profits, driven by a smaller, well-educated and highly effective workforce.
This means that we have this increased labor cost that will drive a lot of low margin and labor-intensive manufacturing factory maybe move out of China. So this is already happening, and this will continue.
But why not keep cheap manufacturing labor in the country and just fill up the workforce with young immigrants? Some experts point out China's relatively homogeneous society and its leadership's hesitancy to encourage mass immigration. Instead, like many developed nations, Beijing is looking to attract a specific kind of immigrant to help fuel its economic transition.
And so with immigration, they're specifically looking at where they see gaps in knowledge, gaps in skills, and this is where they tend to try to attract more high-skilled laborers or high-skilled technical engineers and stuff like that into the Chinese economy.
So, what does all of this mean for the rest of the world? In the coming decades, China is planning to use its smaller workforce more effectively and compete with the leaders in many high-profit, high-tech markets. The country is already dominating the global market for selling and buying electric cars.
So means that from the future, you maybe China will not be the world factory, but China will be definitely become the center of the high tech and the high margin products. Yeah, this is already happening.
As China transitions away from being the world's manufacturing hub, analysts say other nations exporting their raw materials to China will eventually see the market stagnate. even if it takes decades before the country actually starts importing less.
This will have some implication for the country, who export a lot to China. For example, like Australia and like Brazil and also Russia. Yeah, they are the, China is a big market for their minerals and fossil fuel.
China's demographic shift could eventually see a globally important source of cheap labor drying up, pushing international manufacturers to look elsewhere, to countries with younger populations. But for the people employed, cheap labor jobs will likely still result in poor working conditions.
Like India and also maybe like also other Asian countries such as Bangladesh or maybe like Thailand, they also have plenty of labor force, and also now in the South America is also have is a potential and manufacturing centers, and also maybe in the future Africa maybe also can be. So we never know. So but for these countries, their labor cost is still low. So means if the manufacturing they can provide the manufacturing goods, then we can still keep the price relatively low.
Experts say many international companies are already moving their business elsewhere, especially the labor-intensive industries. And China itself is investing heavily around the world, potentially ready to exploit the resource it will run out of at home: plentiful, cheap labor.